Hello again, everyone. I am Carol Mullins, the KVEC Literacy Instructional Specialist, and today I am going to focus on interdisciplinary literacy practice number 5 that is housed in the Kentucky Academic Standards for Reading and Writing. The literacy practice itself is not a standard. It is a practice that students should be involved in order to reach the intent of the rigor of our standards. So, literacy practice number 5, apply strategic practices with scaffolding and then independently to approach new literacy tasks. Now, I do want to point out when we say literacy tasks, they're found in all subject areas. So what we're doing with the video series to kind of clarify the practices and to share a strategy that addresses the practice is very appropriate for all content areas, not just English language arts. So, the goal for this session is truly a training for the classroom teacher. So what we're going to do is come to build a shared understanding of the fact that when students strategically approach literacy tasks, they make intentional decisions about when, where, and how to apply their thinking and the learning process. And the bottom line here, when we're talking about Goal A, students have to show us their applied thinking in a written response. So everything that we're doing with the instructional strategy for this practice, the ultimate goal is a written response. Now, Goal B, the relevance between students asking their own question and increasing inquiry and rigor in the classroom. So the whole intent of making sure that students are exposed to these types of strategies that are strategic and are intentional to help students make decisions. What you see on the screen there is a page from the standards document, and we're looking at the practice number 5, and you see a box that says possible teacher actions and possible student actions. Now, the possible teacher actions all have to do with you offering and modeling different learning strategies for how to approach a new text, but that we provide those opportunities in our instruction to allow students to self-regulate. And when you look over to the right side, the possible student actions, students can only do this if the teacher assignment is aligned and the strategy is the best strategy that will meet the need for a particular text or task. And all of us as educators have had those times when you thought, wow, this bombed. So we go back to the drawing board and we come up with a different strategy. So the applying strategic practices with scaffolding and then eventually moving kids to independence with the task is such an important part of the depth of rigor of the intent of our standards. So what I want to share with you today is some information for your professional learning and then a strategy that basically reaches all parts of this practice, all levels of this practice. So if you will look on the screen, the independence and transference part ultimately empowers students as lifelong learners. Now, when we're reading this statement, encouraging students to build awareness, understanding, and control of their thought processes. This is also known as metacognition, thinking about your own thinking. And as adults, we probably do that 23 hours out of a 24-hour day. Students do not do that. So there has to be opportunities for in our instructions to help students focus and do think about their thinking. And metacognition has been identified by the Education Endowment Foundation Toolkit as one of the most cost-effective ways to improve learning. And there you see the resource that came from Critical Thinking, How to Help Your Students Become Better Learners. What we're talking about is building the learning power. That's the intent of the practice itself. So when we're talking about when we're talking about this independence and transferring, it's all subject areas again. And we want to try lots of different strategies so that kids have a repertoire of strategies. A little more building information for you. To build a learning strategies, it's a three-part process. Before a task, the effective planning. That is the most crucial because students are only going to do and go as far as you take them. So those high expectations have to be a part of your effective planning. The during, self-monitoring, and after evaluation and reflection. Now, the little video that I've left a link for you, it's about monitoring and managing your learning. It's just 1 minute and 47 seconds, and I really encourage you to take the time to look at this. And when we're talking about older students, it could be a video that you could share with students to help them understand what you are trying to achieve or to get them to achieve. Take just a second and read the screen, and if you are with someone else, maybe discuss this with them. The teacher is usually the person who asks the questions during a discussion. In a longitudinal study of elementary and secondary school classes, Dillon found that each student asked only blank questions per month on average. And the results of this tells us teachers must take deliberate steps to get their students to ask questions. So if you're with someone or a group and you want to stop the PowerPoint right now and have a discussion about what your prediction is, and if any of you have seen this before, don't give away the answer. All right, our answer is 1. Now, students ask lots of questions during a day's time, but when in their research that students ask only 1 question per month on average is related to the content and instruction and how to learn. You know, students will ask each other most of the time before they will ask us. So let's talk about a traditional classroom for a minute. Let's think about this. In a traditional classroom, teachers ask, students answer. Teachers explain, students take notes. Teachers create, students complete. So the instruction and inquiry flow almost entirely in one direction, from the teacher to the student. And there are times this needs to happen. We're not saying direct instruction does not have a place in the classroom. It most certainly does. But what the practices are saying is we have to move beyond this. This cannot be the only instruction. So if you're watching with someone, stop and talk about that a little bit. Right now, I'm going to focus on a proven strategy that helps teach students to ask their own questions, and a lot of you have been involved with this strategy as we get to it. But our literacy practice number 5 says apply strategic practices with scaffolding and then independently. This strategy we're going to look at will address all 3 of those. Let's take just a minute Well, I ask kids questions. Kids ask me questions. Why is it worth the time and effort to encourage more student questions? Well, when we look at what the data and research is showing us, it's a little bit scary to me. The average preschool child asks 100 questions per day, but that number declines sharply when kids enter grade school. By middle school, the number of questions the average child asks in a day approaches 0, which we looked at that a while ago. Now, why do you think there's such a drastic decrease in the frequency of a behavior, such as question, that seems to come so naturally to most kids when they are young? What happens? Lots of things do happen, but this is in our control as educators. Because like most adults, kids will do what they are rewarded for doing. And in school, you are rewarded for having correct answers, not asking good questions. So our revised standards and our literacy practices are trying to move us into instructional strategies that get kids asking questions and having that environment where it's okay if the question's not real good. It's okay if the question is incorrect. So, one of the things that in the data for being college and career ready is having the ability to ask good questions. Now, on the Google Drive, which you can access through the Holler also, that's a direct link to the Google Drive, there are these 2 articles that you can use however you want to in PLCs, planning period, individually. But these are some resources that will help you. For example, from the Mind Shift, all of these are 1 or 2 page articles that give you lots of information. But Mind Shift is a site that it's about how we learn. So for students, why the question is more important than the answer. And then at the Right Question Institute, we have an article that is what are the frequently asked questions about a technique called the question formulation technique. And then a more recent article about how questioning can drive arguments, productive debate, and information literacy among students. So all of these would give you some really good information and assistance in clarifying and understanding what is happening in a student's brain when they are allowed to ask their own questions. So we're going to move into the strategy itself, and a lot of you've heard about it. It's the QFT. QFT actually it was introduced to us through a resource, a book called Make Just One Change, Teach Students to Ask Their Own Questions by Dan Rothstein and Luz Santana. Now, I have been involved with this process and understanding about QFT since 2015, and I've had the pleasure of great opportunity to attend the conferences that the Right Question Institute hosts annually. So I have seen this used with students. I've seen the depth of knowledge that it causes students to go to, where if we just use the traditional classroom approach, students aren't going to get there. So one of the sayings they have is one small change can yield big results. So we're going to take a little bit of time, and I'm going to quickly clarify and introduce this QFT process to you. So what is it? What is the question formulation techniques? Well, this is what draws me in, and I have it underlined. QFT is a step-by-step process, and I don't advocate step-by-step processes very often, but this is where we are teaching metacognition to students. We're trying to give them a step-by-step process to know what it means to think about their thinking. And through the process, they produce their own questions, they improve them, and then strategize on how to use them. Your role as the teacher is just to facilitate that process. Well, what's the purpose of it? Well, it provides a deliberate way. Again, I'm going back to that step-by-step process, a deliberate way to help students cultivate and in my opinion, internalize a skill that is fundamentally important for all learning, not just what they do in our classroom, but learning about life, thinking about your thinking. At this point, if you want, I suggest that you stop the video and go to the resources page and pull out the handout. It's called the QFT 101 handout, because I will use this. You could use this to take notes as we go through it, but we're going to kind of go through each step with a quick review and information about it. So having a hard copy of something to add notes to might help you. But again, the QFT is a rigorous step-by-step process that helps students, any grade, any subject area, and any level of academic readiness. We are helping them to consistently produce their own questions, improve their questions, and then strategize how to use their own questions. Well, what does that mean? Strategize on how to learn the content you're asking them to learn is what we mean by strategize your own content. So let's take a look at the components of the QFT. We actually have 6 components, and they are listed on that QFT 101 handout with a little more information than what I have time to give you today. So when we're looking at the 6 components, we have the question focus, the Q focus, and that sets the stage, and it is teacher design. And then we move to the students. They will produce their own questions. They will improve those questions. They will prioritize them. And then discussing the next steps is, what are we going to do with this information we've learned about our content? So those are the most important 5-step processes. And once that is complete, the ultimate reflection. This is where learning takes place. This is where all the information comes together. And usually, as always, in terms of students, it will be a written response. So let's take each one of the 6 and very quickly. It is divided on the QFT 101 sheet. You actually have 3 pages to the 101 sheet. But what is the question focus? And this is so important for teachers to understand what the question focus is. It is simply a statement, not a question. It's a statement, a visual, or an oral aid to help students generate questions. It should be created from your content, it should be brief, and it should stimulate a new line of thinking. And I'm going to show you a quick example in a minute. But let's get your learning, your professional learning, your understanding about what it is, first of all. What it's not is a question. It's a statement. 90% of the time in the classroom, it will be a statement. It doesn't have to be. It can be that visual or an oral aid. The second step, we are still in our steps for producing questions. we do have some rules that we give students. We want them, in whatever amount of time you want to give students, we want them to ask as many questions about your statement or whatever your cue focus is. We want them to write down as many questions as they can. They're not to stop to answer, judge, or discuss. In other words, this is done in silence. And teachers, there are resources that will show you different ways to do this process. Could be done in small groups, could be done individually, but there are lots of resources that I'm going to allow you access to that you can see how different teachers have done it. But they don't stop to answer, judge, or discuss. Write down every question exactly as it was stated. And then once that time is up, go back and look at, did I write a statement instead of a question? If I did, I need to change it into a question. And again, QFT 101 has a quick explanation for you. The next thing, once we have done that and we have the questions and we're still in the producing questions step, we need to help students understand the difference in closed-ended and open-ended questions. And kids catch on to this even at the primary. You know, a closed-ended question, you can only have a one-word answer, yes or no. And they've heard that a lot by the time they enter kindergarten, so this is not a big deal for them. Open-ended questions require more explanation. So we've taught them the difference in a closed-ended question and an open-ended question. So our next part of producing questions is for students to go through the questions that they've written, and if they've had a statement, they've turned it into a question. Now they need to identify their questions. Is it a closed question or is it an open-ended? And we ask them just to go through and mark C or O. Now we move into the improving questions, and this is so vital. This is where we start the deeper thinking. This is the first step in moving them into high-level thinking. We want them to choose one of their closed-ended questions and change it to an open-ended. And then we want them to do the opposite. We want them to take an open-ended question and change it into a closed-ended question. And this is so important because we're teaching students to think deeper with every step of this process. And here is what's happening in the brain as we're activating these critical thinking skills. When we're doing closed to open, we're asking kids to think in many different directions. But when we're asking them to do open to closed, let me see here if I can get this going. There we go. We are asking them to narrow down and focus and do convergent thinking. Now, when I look at this, and having been an English teacher, a high school administrator, taught in elementary, the thing that I'm seeing taking place here is that we are getting kids ready to take all of this information and we're helping them to narrow it down and focus. We're guiding them in learning how to do that, which is what our assessment asks kids to do, especially when you're thinking about our short answer questions, our on-demand writing, whatever it is. They're always having to take a big subject, get narrowed down in focus, and answer a task or a prompt that we've given them. So this process allows them to learn how to do that in a non-threatening way. They are definitely connected to writing skills because this is a step-by-step, hands-on process that helps students gather information that they're going to use in every class. You have to gather the information, you have to think about it widely, you have to narrow it down. So this one strategy of QFT helps kids to do that. Now, the next step is to review your list of questions. Choose, now we're really going to make them focus more. Choose the 3 questions that you consider the most important. And I love this phase right here because that's where we know where we want, what we want students to learn. We know it. They don't know it yet. So we see if they have, as being the facilitator going around the room, you're seeing if they're veering off into an avenue that is not focused in the learning that's going to take place. And it gives you as the classroom teacher the opportunity to get kids back on track. Because when they're choosing these 3 questions, they must always go back to your cue focus. So that's why it's so important that your cue focus is written or shown or however you choose to use it, that it is within the content, within the area of information that you want kids to learn and do a deep learning about. And again, on the page 2 of the QFT 101, you have some more information. They're short and sweet. And you know, after you've done this with kids a little while, you may even want to use some of the information on these handouts to give directly to your students to use. Now, our next steps we call an action plan. Now we're going to go further. We've narrowed it down to 3 important questions. So in order to answer these questions, what information do you need to know? And what tasks do you need to do? Now, the teacher's going to have this in mind. You as the instructor, you will already have this in mind, but we're teaching kids critical thinking skills and enhancing their metacognition. We're making them think about their own thinking. What do they need to know? And what do I need to do in order to learn that? And then the last step is reflection. And why did you choose those 3 questions as the most important? Now, there's going to be some time gap in between there, and there may be some instruction that will take place before you get students to do the reflection part, but do not leave this step out because, again, we're making kids think about why they do what they do. Why did they learn? What did they need? How did they need it? And then have them look at their whole set of questions and where are your priority questions in the sequence of your entire list. Was it the first question you asked? Was it the last question? And my experience has been the best questions are toward the middle and end, because the more questions students ask, the more time you allow them, the better the questions get, and usually will move toward the content you're teaching and what you're wanting them to get out of the instruction. So, all of that said, let's look at very quickly at an example that is, it's actually from the Right Question Institute, and I'm going to give you links to where you can go in and find many more examples. But this is a middle school classroom example. And the topic is American history, the Civil War, and the purpose of the teacher is to engage students in a pre-reading activity. So let's look at what this teacher chose to do. She chose, or he chose, to use a visual. So take just a minute and study that and stop the video, look at this picture for a little while, and what we're doing here is we are actually combining two practices because we are doing interdisciplinary literacy practice 1 as well as 5 because we're recognizing that text is anything that communicates a message. Here are the student questions shared by the right question. Why are they fighting? Are they fighting? Are they part of the government? Where were they? Who are they? Were they signing anything? Who else was there? Why are you hitting him? And my all-time favorite number 9 is, why didn't they call 911? Talk about lots of discussion that could take place there. Then look what happens after the middle. Questions begin to change a little bit. Was this related to slavery? Why is he hitting him with a bat? Why are you taking a pen? Why are they in court? Who hit first? Who died? And why are they smiling? And I think the why are they smiling, at first I didn't catch that because it didn't have a good visual picture of this, but we have those sketched in the background smiling at this incident taking place. So these were middle school students' questions based on the question focus determined by the teacher. Now, of course, the next step would be, we would want to start prioritizing questions, producing questions, the whole 9 yards. But this is where it starts, right here. This is the beginning of teaching students to ask their own questions. Now, why did I choose to share QFT for practice number 5? Well, we know rigor is for everyone, and this process, the QFT, has the thinking abilities that we are most trying to help kids acquire for lifelong learning. It's already built into this strategy. We're having them think divergently, convergently, and then metacognitively, thinking about their own thinking, why they do the things they do related to the content. So when we ask kids, why did you pick those as your 3 priority questions, we're really moving them into metacognitive thinking. And as I said, this can be done even at a kindergarten level. I have seen teachers do the QFT. Maybe it's an abbreviated version, but they're moving kids into that step of, I need to think about it instead of just memorizing facts about it. So, again, for you as a professional learning situation today, the research confirms the importance of student questioning. Self-questioning is a metacognitive strategy, and it has been proven to be one of the most effective metacognitive strategies. Students asking their own questions about your content, which in turn, the research from Hattie shows engaging in pre-lesson self-questioning improves students' rate of learning by nearly 50%. And the teacher has not stood up in the front of the classroom and delivered all this information. Students have had a part of investigating that based on what they want to know, and obviously the teacher, some of the direct instruction leading them to away from things that are where they misguide themselves. That is the role of the teacher in the process. Again, QFT can be used effectively before, during, and after. The research I showed you was just based on using it at the beginning of instruction, but here we have some suggestions that what these are actually on the screen are through the years since 2015, and teachers have given me feedback, and also Kim Sargent, who is very active with the QFT. This is some of the feedback we've seen of how teachers and where teachers what part of the instruction teachers have used QFT. So that's just a little bit of information for you. This is also some FYIs for you that we've gathered through the years of how QFT has been used across the disciplines, and you're seeing science experiments, research, essays, analyze a word problem in math, to think more deeply about a challenging reading assignment, to get unstuck. But lots of this is not an all-encompassing list by any means. It's just to get you started. And here is some information just showing you what this strategy does for kids. When you turn the tables on them, and they are in charge of digging to ask their own questions based on your cue focus to think about. They feel more confident, they express greater interest, and they're more curious. And students feel a greater sense of urgency and responsibility to get the answer. They want to know the answer. If they've asked the question, they want an answer. Behavior. Students, the intent of involving them in this is to get them to think about their thinking, which in turn helps them self-regulate more effectively, collaborate and listen to each other. And, they begin to negotiate and work on reaching consensus if they're working in a group with their questions. Again, here, for you, professional learning, these are step-by-step videos that have been produced through several years from the Right Question Institute. You can see QFT in action in all content areas and most all grade levels. So I really encourage you to take the time to look at this. This is pretty much Kim shared this with me, Kim Sargent. This is kind of a new release from the Right Question Institute, focusing on how teachers have used QFT in the classroom. Instructional resources. What you will find, there'll be a folder on this drive, which you can also access by from the holler on the Reading, Writing, Literacy holler. We have the QFT, I mentioned the QFT 101. Then you have several other resources that will help provide you background information, as well as resources you can put into kids' hands. So this is all about the instructional part, where the other things were about your professional learning. So this concludes a look at Interdisciplinary number 5, literacy practice number 5, and how it actually overlaps. Many of the literacy practices overlap, so don't miss those connections when you're planning your instruction. There is my email if you need to contact me, and once again, thank you for joining us.